Hello and welcome to Shackleton's Budget Deep Dive podcast. We put quite a lot of information out in the immediate aftermath of the budget and the days following, which summarised Shackleton's overall reaction to the announcements that the Chancellor made on the 26th of November. So the purpose of today's podcast is to delve a bit deeper into some of the really big headline-grabbing topics that emerged on that day. I'm Will Gould, Head of Communications here at Shackleton, and I'm joined by my two colleagues, Emma Parla, one of our financial planners, and Adam Ryan, who leads our employee benefits consulting business. And I've asked Adam in particular to join us to talk about a particular topic, which is the salary sacrifice rule changes, which are going to kick in a bit further down the track. Emma, I'm going to put the first question to you, which is the topic of income tax. We were expecting for a brief period before the budget that the Chancellor might increase the rate of income tax and possibly national insurance, and she seems to have stepped back from that decision. But of course, she did announce that she was going to extend the freeze on the tax thresholds, which have already been in place for a few years, via that process known as fiscal drag. Put simply, what do you make of that? And broadly speaking, what are the financial planning implications for lots of people? Is there anything that people can do to mitigate the effect?
Yeah, so it's kind of a softer way of increasing your income taxes, basically, because obviously it's now frozen until 2031, which, like, in effect, is 5 years. Any pay rise that you're going to get over those next 5 years is probably going to get eaten up by paying more tax. So you're not actually going to feel the benefits of small pay rises. On top of that, we've still got like inflation rising, standard cost of living is rising. So everything is going to feel like it's going to cost a little bit more. I think she kind of wanted to do it in the softly approach so as to not upset too many people, because immediately we're not going to feel it. It's going to be a few months down the line and a gradual kind of, I don't really feel like I've got so much money as I used to have sort of thing, without that actual I'm paying more tax kind of thing. But yes, there's definitely things we can do. It's just one of those things, it's the old adage, you need to take advice. You need to look at what you're doing, what allowances are available to you that you're not making use of, and making sure that every single tax allowance available you're using, so that you're paying as little tax as possible without not paying tax, if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. And obviously, I think we're going to be talking quite a lot over the course of this session about making use of allowances. And I suspect also about the sequencing of those allowances. And that's an important topic, isn't it, that a lot of people forget about. So income tax not technically going up, but people are still probably going to feel as though they're enduring a higher income tax burden anyway. The other big announcement, probably the biggest headline grabber, has been around changes to the ISA rules, which have been largely left alone for quite some time now. Can't remember exactly when the £20,000 allowance was introduced, but there have been previous concerns raised that those might be subject to change. This time, the Chancellor has, of course, gone ahead and done it. So again, what are the implications of that? What can people do?
Or a person over 65 from 2027, they'll still be able to have their full £20,000 worth of ISA sitting in cash if they so wish. Okay. For everybody else, the cash allowance is going to be reduced to £12,000, but you can still have £20,000 in an ISA. So that would mean that of the £20,000, you could have £12,000 sitting in cash in your bank account, and you could have the further £8,000 invested into stocks and shares ISA. I think the benefit of that is I see a lot of clients that do have a lot of cash sitting in ISA, and as interest rates are coming down again, it's like, it's time to have a chat with somebody and see whether you may be better off to be putting that extra bit into investment for future use. I mean, it depends what that money's sitting there for, because, we've all got our different pots of money and different sort of goals and objectives for it. So it depends what it's sitting there for, and everybody's different. Everybody sort of has different amounts of cash sitting around. So again, it's time to have a chat and just make sure that you're doing the best, making your money work the best for you.
Make an individual plan really based on your circumstances. And
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
that's going to be the overarching refrain throughout this conversation. So just to be clear, these changes don't kick in next tax year, do they?
No,
It's the following one. So people will be able to put away up to £20,000 in cash if that's the right thing for them to do. And this question of whether it is or not
yeah,
is an advisor can help by asking those questions, assessing attitude to risk, and really seeing those pots
exactly. Yeah.
in the context of your own goals. The next biggie, which was announced, which again has drawn a lot of media attention, was around changes to, well, various residential property related taxes. But of course, most significantly, this introduction of a high value surcharge on council tax. Um, Tell us a little bit more about that, and again, anything that anyone can do.
So they're proposing to put a £2,500 surcharge on your council tax for any property worth 2 million, and that increases to 7,500 for properties worth 5 million. And actually, I had a chat with a client the other day whose property is worth 3 million, and they are considering downsizing anyway. So it came into the conversation about it, and the wife said, if I've got a property worth 2 million, I can afford to pay £2,500 extra on it. So it's kind of, to her, it felt like a drop in the ocean. If you can afford a property that big, you probably can afford the £2,500. But, it's an additional tax that people pay. And if we think of properties in London, that's probably going to bring quite a few properties into play, which kind of brings you into thinking about the inheritance tax brackets. I mean, you start losing your allowances when your property, when your estate is worth 2 million. So it's all kind of making things worse for people in that bracket. So it's definitely not that people won't feel kindly about it. I don't think it'll hurt them necessarily in their pocket, but it's just another way that, you're having to sort of fork out. you know, It's not, nobody hasn't called it a tax. It's called it a surcharge.
And of course, not everyone, it's probably important to say, is in the situation of your client you've just described there. Lots of people might have owned those properties for many, many years. This sounds like you're saying might well actually trigger some behavioral changes and possibly encourage more people to downsize.
But somebody's got to buy it. So, whether they're downsizing or not, it's still somebody's going to move into that property. So that's the, let's see what happens with that. I think be interesting to see how much money it actually raises.
Mm.
Because there are quite a few people and it's based on the owner as well and not on the occupier, which is another interesting thing, because you've got a lot of people that probably own property in London that are not necessarily UK tax residents, etc. But because it's council tax, it should sort of come into play more. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting one.
Different than from council tax as we've always known it, where the occupier has been liable for the charge. In this case, it's the owner.
Yeah. But whether they pass that on, if it is tenanted, whether that they pass that on, who knows how that's going to work.
Well, that may indeed create more inflation in the
Yeah.
rental market. Obviously, at the higher end of that market rather than the lower end. The next topic we were going to look at is inheritance tax and gifting. We didn't see any major announcements around this topic this time around, did we? But I think it's just an opportune moment, perhaps, just to have a think about some headline
Inheritance.
messages.
So the big thing with inheritance tax, they haven't changed it. Well, they haven't changed the nil rate ban since 2009. In 2009, the average property price was around about £210,000, and in London, obviously, a lot more. And they moved the nil rate ban to £325,000. So you had a little bit of leeway from your average property price to your nil rate band. Well, now the nil
I
rate
think
band is still.
just perhaps worth saying, we talked earlier about the income tax brackets being frozen. I think this is a fantastic example of showing just how powerful, if you like, fiscal drag actually can be over the course of a decade or more. It really does make a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Because today the average property price is now £271,000, and in London it's more like 560,000. So if you're a single person with no children, you're very likely to be pulled into the inheritance tax regime without even really thinking you're wealthy, because the majority of it is your property. And this is what a lot of people don't kind of realize, that, your house brings you into it. I think originally when inheritance tax was brought in, it was like 1986, when the average property was about 20,000, and they bought in the nil rate band at 70,000, 3 times the average property price. So that, exactly like you say, by not moving those thresholds, more and more people are beginning to pay in that tax, and each year the revenue is rising.
And again, our previous topic, we were talking about the high value surcharge. Of course, again, we're likely to see, assuming the property market does continue to rise, in the long term, we'll see more and more people dragged into that bracket, won't we? And so back to inheritance tax, there are things people can do, aren't there?
Yes, and these are, again, they're little known, because people, for some reason in this country, don't talk about money. It's one thing saying how much do you earn, it's another thing saying did you know, sort of thing. But yeah, we have various annual allowances that we can use. We have a £3,000 gifting allowance that we can use, that you can give to any person. You have £250 that you can give to as many people as possible, and you have a very, very not widely known gifting allowance called a gift out of normal expenditure, and that's if your income is more than you need. And as long as you make a regular payment, you can gift away as much as you like from that. But again, these are all things that you should be taking advice on, and not actually thinking, oh well, I'll do that, without really knowing the ins and outs of it. So if you're thinking inheritance tax, it's time to have a chat with an advisor. The other thing that we really need to bear in mind is the fact that pensions are coming into the equation as well in 2027. So
Because
we've
that was
worked out
announced last year, wasn't it? That was
that was
last
last
budget,
year, yeah.
but it hasn't come into effect yet.
2027 that comes into effect. No, historically, with sort of higher net worth clients, we've said to them, spend your other assets before you start paying your pension, because it's not included. We can pass it down, etc., etc. Well, that's all going to go away and be pulled into inheritance tax. So if you take those two considerations, your property price and then a pension that you've saved for all your life, it's time to have a chat.
Yes. So once again, and there are, of course, some quite sophisticated techniques, aren't there, to potentially mitigate against inheritance tax. But again, those would have to depend very much on anyone's individual
On personal
circumstances.
circumstances, yeah.
Definitely
Um,
require advice and quite
so
specialist input.
absolutely. And you should make sure that your will is written by a reputable person that understands the inheritance tax structure, etc. Not some will writer that you've met down the pub or something like that. It is right. It is very, very difficult to undo a will if it's written incorrectly after the fact. But yeah, as you talk about some complicated things, so there are like family investment companies, sort of like a company structure, but they are specifically designed for passing wealth down generations. It's a very specialist area. It just depends on their circumstances and what they want from their money, what they want to happen, because not everybody wants the same. So
There
it's
are
sort of
pros and
understanding all that.
cons to all of these techniques, aren't there?
Yeah.
And one thing we did say we'd make a shout out for, this is probably an opportunity, and we can say this really not as a piece of advice, but time for people to review their expression of wish forms. Can you
Yes.
tell us what we mean by that?
Well, expression of form is basically an expression of wishes, just as it says on the tin. But, if you have a pension with somebody, pension tends to be held by trustees, and the trustees need to know what would happen to that pension if anything happens to you. So it's very important that you keep that expression of wishes up to date. So, for example, 1 in 2 couples divorce. Have you still got your ex-husband down as an expression of wish? Is it going to your children? One thing that I always use with my clients is the 99 1% in the expression of wishes. So what that means is you put your 99% down to the person that you want it to go to first.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the worst should happen and something happens to you both at the same time, you're in a car crash or something, something dreadful, that extra 1% going to a child or whoever you wanted it to go to will show the trustees that they are able to do that. And then they'll know that they can send that money out to that other person,
So
sort of thing.
that sends a signal of intent. But of course, because the payments are made out of a trust structure, the tax treatment is hugely more favourable.
Exactly, yeah. It's discretion of the trustees. Yeah. There's another bit there as well with your pensions when they're coming into the 2027 into the inheritance tax regime. If you die today before the age of 75, your pension gets passed down free of income tax. But if you die after the age of 75, your pension gets passed down and the beneficiary pays tax at their marginal rate. So if that happens after it's come into the inheritance tax regime, the beneficiary could be paying 40% inheritance tax on it. And then they could be paying another 40% on their marginal income tax. So it's really, really a big area that we need to be considering and looking at ways that we can make that easier.
Easily avoided with the right planning in place, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gosh, a lot to think about. Adam, you've been sitting very patiently listening to us talking through
Very interesting
of
to
the,
listen to it.
well, some of those big announcements, but one that's perhaps less of a headline grabber, but it's possibly going to affect the largest number of people. I read a headline only today that I think they think about 3 million people might be impacted by these changes to the so-called salary sacrifice rules, whereby you can essentially forego a part of your contractual salary in exchange for another benefit. The main one being pension contributions, but also things like bikes and other potential benefits.
Yeah, all sorts nowadays.
So you, in the course of your day-to-day professional life, you help employers, but you're also a planner by background, and so you fully understand and look at this from the perspective of employees as well. I wonder if you could just talk us through the implications as you see them of the changes that have been announced.
Firstly, salary sacrifice has been a target in the budget for as long as I can remember. That there's always been speculation that there was going to be a change, and finally the Chancellor decided to make some amendments. I think there's lots of water to flow under this bridge, and that's why it's been pushed out to 2029. The actual mechanisms, I think, are very unclear as to how it's going to work. But I think
But a very high-level proposal is to cap the amount of salary that can be sacrificed and put into a pension at £2,000. That's right.
Exactly right. Yes. Yeah. It's simply a tax efficient way of paying contributions into the pension. I think there's going to be some unintended consequences potentially, because employers offer salary sacrifice to create a budget for their employees and their other benefits. So they would reinvest the employer national insurance savings either back into the pension for the individual or use those savings on alternative benefits, whether that be healthcare related or risk related. I think we're going to see with this potential change not only a reduction potentially in some of those benefits, but also an impact on the end person's pension pot, because you're going to see employers now having to, for those that reinvested, actually not being able to do that anymore. And obviously that will mean that everybody's pension pot will suffer in the end. I think if we looked at our client bank, well over 50% of the companies that we work with offer salary sacrifice as a solution to their employees. So I think 3 million is probably a lowball number in terms of the estimate that you mentioned there, Will. I think it's probably going to end up being a little bit more than that.
Gosh, so really, really broad impacts. And as you say, this proposed changes don't come into force for a number of years. Probably we can't obviously make advice based on anything other than an individual's circumstances, but would you say that in a lot of cases it's going to be a question of waiting and seeing for both employers and employees?
I think it is, but much echoing Emma's comments, I think it emphasises the importance of planning, actually engaging with a company like Shackleton, who's able to advise either the employer, the employee, or the individual into how to get the best out of their budget for benefit spend, but also how to plan. What are what's the individual on target for at retirement, and how are they going to get to the retirement goal that they want to achieve? And so actually engaging with that as early as possible is something we always stress to our clients. We are starting to, just despite it being 2029, we are starting to get people asking us, what should we be doing? So we're formulating plans and helping clients now.
So there's the proof. A lot of people do want to make and keep reviewing their plans a long way out.
Yes,
Sounds
very
like.
much so, yeah.
So take advice seems to be the best advice.
Yeah, very much
Absolutely.
so.
Well, a lot to factor in really, and to think about in terms of this budget. It has obviously been a controversial one, and with the impact of a lot of the changes having been announced not coming into force for some time to come, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out over the next few years. But in the meantime, Emma, Adam, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, and let's see what happens over the coming months.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.